Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Laura Weese, the co-chair with Sam Sperry of the Election Forums Committee. Our co-sponsor in this forum is the League of Women Voters of Seattle-King County. The forum is being recorded and will be available on Horizon House YouTube channel. And the League of Women Voters will be replaying it for their members on Thursday night. So there is going to be a wider audience, although I'm really happy to see all of you here tonight. This is the first election forum we have held in person since October of 2019. And let's cheer! It's so good to see people face to face. We did learn how to do forums on Zoom, and that was great, but this is even better. Well, let's go on to our topic for tonight, Seattle's Social Housing Initiative I-135. The initiative received over 27,000 signatures, and in late August was certified by King County Elections to appear on a special elections ballot. It was too late for the November ballot, so thus we have the special election February 14th. You should all have your ballots by now. They were mailed out last week. A yes vote on I-135 supports the creation of a public development authority which will own and develop and manage social housing, that is publicly financed housing available to people with a range of incomes from 0 to 120% of area median income. And I might say that as of 2022, our area median income was an eye-popping $120,907. Tonight, we're very pleased to have two speakers. Speaking in favor of the initiative is Suresh Chanmugam, a member of the I-135 Steering Committee. He has worked as a software engineer in Seattle since 1999 and volunteers with Tech for Housing, a group that works to ensure Seattle is affordable for everyone. He lives in Jackson Place, not far away between Central District and Little Saigon, with his wife and 3 children. Speaking in opposition to the initiative is David Bloom, an American Baptist minister. From 1978 to 1997, he directed the urban ministry of the Church Council of Greater Seattle. He is the founder of several local organizations, including the Downtown Emergency Services Center, Common Ground, and the Seattle Displacement Coalition. He has served as board president for Real Change, and in 2009 ran for city council. I'm now going to turn the mic over to our moderator, Sam Sperry, co-chair of the Election Forums Committee.
Well, thank you, Laura, and thank you, Reverend Bloom and Mr. Chanmugam, for coming to Horizon House. This is really a special occasion, as Laura indicated, having been, confined to Zoom the last few election cycles. We're very excited about this forum because our community is that better? Okay, thank you. This is a very active and attentive political community. We achieve a very high level of turnout for voters at every election. So tonight, as Laura indicated, our focus is on the pros and cons of this issue. The questions, I'm supposed to point out that our very reliable timers very trusty timers, Adele Reynolds and Doris Ray, will keep us on track, and they will hold up the cards indicating 15 seconds left and that it's time to stop. The questions that we have been prepared by the subcommittee of the Elections Forms Committee, and we have worked on that for the last several weeks. There is one detail, though, that I should mention for people who are not familiar with what a public development authority is. We know about those here because we have a PDA that manages successfully the Pike Place Farmers Market. And there are others. The International District has one. This initiative calls for the establishment of a public development authority to develop and manage this program if voters approve it. A PDA, as they are known here in Washington State, is a government-owned corporation. The City of Seattle states, and I quote, "A PDA allows accomplishment of public purpose activities without assuming them into the regular functions of city government. Each Seattle PDA is governed by a volunteer council that oversees PDA's activities and staff." Okay, now to our discussion. Mr. Chanmugam will be first to speak as he represents the position favoring approval of Initiative 135. After these opening statements by each of our speakers, we will start, and I will alternate asking each one in turn to speak first or second, so that we have equity in who gets to speak first or second. So now, Mr. Chanmugam, if you would care to give your opening statement of 3 minutes.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. Deep thanks to Horizon House for hosting this conversation. My wife and I and our children have neighbors from our multifamily complex where we live who have moved to Horizon House. We've just heard wonderful things about it. And also many thanks to the League of Women Voters for hosting this. When my parents became U.S. citizens in 1983, I found out about the League of Women Voters because they were looking for recommendations of whom to vote for. And sadly, Mondale lost. I also like to thank Reverend Bloom and the Seattle Displacement Coalition. They have been working for decades on this problem while we disagree on the specific solutions to the homelessness crisis that we have in Seattle and the affordability crisis we have in Seattle. We share the same mission and goals. And they've really had the foresight to work on start working on these problems decades ago. I moved to Seattle in 1999, and my rent was, is that 1 minute left, or, I guess, right. And my rent to work in what was then a very tiny software industry, my rent was only about $250 a month for a bedroom in a shared house in the U District. Since then, Seattle's tech industry has grown enormously. I don't know if you know this, but it is the second largest tech hub in the country, and it is the global leader in what's called cloud computing. If you've ever saved a photo on your phone and it's synced to your computer, that technology was invented by Amazon engineers at the Six Arms pub just a few blocks away. That is cloud computing. It has generated an enormous amount of wealth. The Seattle metro region now has a GDP of about $400 billion a year. That's similar in scale to the country Denmark. However, that success has not come equally to everyone in our community. We have seen housing prices rise far faster than incomes for everyone who's not in the tech industry. And that has led to severe humanitarian issues. People have been priced out of the city, out of the only communities they were allowed to live in because of racial segregation. People face very long commutes. Many people are rent burdened. They are spending more than they're put into poverty, even though they have what you would think is a high income, because their housing costs are more than 30% of their income. And of course, as you may know, very sadly, it also causes homelessness. our very high housing costs here. And I think over 300 people live in King County who do not have a home died last year. The humanitarian crisis is very grave. I-135 creates a public development authority that provides mixed income housing using bonds and is based on successful programs in other countries like Denmark and Vienna, Austria.
May I? Yes.
Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. One of the great reasons for being here, as Sam mentioned, is that you people are voters. And thank you for that. We're living in the wake of federal abdication of commitment to publicly funded housing development, subsidy, and maintenance, especially since the destruction of federal housing programs around 1980 when Ronald Reagan became president. And one comment I'd like to make in response to Suresh, that this plan does not control rent pricing. It's not a rent control mechanism. What we're dealing with, as he has outlined the problem very clearly. We don't disagree on the problem. Initiative 135 does nothing to address the homelessness crisis. 10 to 12 to 14,000 people in Seattle, homeless on any given night, living in the streets and doorways, in their cars, in tents, etc. Alice Wolt, who co-wrote the op-ed in the Seattle Times with me, I strongly believe our priorities must be on the housing of homeless living on the streets, in tents, cars, and RVs, providing appropriate mental health and substance abuse services and housing for those who need it. Initiative 135 does nothing about that. It also does nothing to resolve the problem of housing affordability, with average rents now in excess of $2,000 a month, median housing prices around $800,000. Initiative 135 does nothing about that. Instead, it creates a mixed income program of up to 120% of median income that is publicly subsidized through bonds or some other source, while the greatest need is for the 50,000 households in Seattle who are below 50% of median. 2/3 of the housing that would be created under this program is more directed at people with market income, market rate housing, than people who have the biggest need. To the extent possible, the initiative claims all developments must contain housing units that accommodate a mix of income ranges. So we're talking about up to 50 to 80% of median, which is $38,000 to $61,000 income, 80 to 120% of median, which for a one-person household can be up to $91,000. And if we're talking about families, three or four person residents, moderate income up to $87,000, median income up to $130,000. What we're talking about here is a program that is defined toward average income well above the problems facing people who are housing poor in our city. And it's just, to tell you the truth, I don't understand why Real Change, of which I'm a former board president, is doing this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Our first question will go to Reverend Bloom, since Mr. Chanmugam got to speak first. And the first question is, how much would this program cost, and how would it be funded? You can use your mic here if you want to.
Is this? Oh, it's not here. Is it? Hello? Yeah, hello. What? That's a good question. It's kind of curious you're asking me the question, how much it's going to cost. One of the issues that we have, however, with this is that in the initiative, the city, the city will be required, the city of Seattle will be required to provide 18-month startup for the development of office, staff, infrastructure of various types, as much as $750,000 just to get the thing organized. At the time when the city says it doesn't have any money. So why are we, I'm going to say real change, because it's real change that's behind this. Why is real change saying that they're launching a mixed income housing program that isn't going to cost us any money, any public money, and then asking for $750,000 right off the bat to get the thing organized? It doesn't make any sense.
Sure.
You want me to repeat the question?
Sure, that'd be good.
How much would this program cost, and how would it be funded?
Sure. So I spoke a little long in my intro, so I'll first explain.
You're in there,
Yeah.
Should I turn this off?
Yes.
I could also get up there. And,
Maybe the other
yeah.
one. Just step to the.
Yeah, I'll just step to it.
All right, well, I'll turn it off.
That's it.
Don't turn it on.
That one's off. So I first want to explain. Does that one need to be turned off? There we go. Aha. So should we get started? Do you want to start? Great. So first, I know it sounds shocking that we would help someone who earns between 80 and 120% of the area median income afford to live here. But I have some shocking news for you. Pretty much all of you here, if you moved to Seattle today, at the same point in your career, when you first moved to Seattle, perhaps even to raise a family, you could not afford to live here. Pretty much all of you. That is how dire our situation is. Our city is unaffordable to pretty much anyone who is not a highly compensated software engineer like me. That is why I-135 reaches a much broader range. And then quickly, how will it pay for it? How will it be funded? In Vienna, which houses 60% of its population with a social housing program, that is done with a tiny 1% payroll tax. When you work on a time scale of, say, decades, the way we invest in light rail, it is actually quite affordable. It is, in fact, probably the most affordable way to fund housing for everyone.
All right, Mr. Chanmugam, you get to stand up again. Can a public development authority, such as is proposed by this initiative, be held accountable by the public?
That is an excellent question. Yes, you as residents of the city can sue the Public Development Authority if its board does not carry out its work per the charter of the Public Development Authority, which is written into the I-135 legislation. Also, any elected leaders at the city, state, county, or federal level who direct funds to the Public Development Authority would also be held accountable to voters. So we have, King County voted to send money to the baseball stadium or something like that. Voters could say, well, that's terrible. Why are you taking my tax money and sending it to the Mariners? They didn't even make it to the playoffs.
Oh, sorry. Got to get this together. Yes, I mean, I agree with the answer. Yes, it is possible. My concern, by the way, there are 3 existing PDAs in Seattle that do housing. Pike Market, Chinatown, ID, and Community Roots. I am a former council member or board member of the Pike Market PDA, and I understand the interior workings of the management of a public development authority, and they are complex. I do not understand why Real Change, which historically is a homelessness advocacy and job-creating institution is trying to take on the complexity and the legal challenges. And they're there. And so the answer to the question is yes. There is oversight, you can sue, etc. But why is Real Change doing this? I don't understand it. It's a distraction. It's enormous management and oversight responsibilities, and I think it's a waste of effort.
Okay, Reverend Brew, our third.
I got it off.
Hello? Okay. Our third question is, the existing Seattle levy for low-income housing will be up for renewal this fall. Does this initiative obviate the need, does this renewal obviate the need for Initiative 135?
The answer is no. The biggest challenge facing Seattle's housing crisis is the lack of funds. My concern about Initiative 135 is that it is a distraction. The city is talking about practically tripling the size of the levy up to as much as $100 or $840 million to put on the ballot at the end of this year. That's critical in terms of the future of our ability to continue to fund the excellent nonprofits that produce housing in this city. So and one of the concerns that I have is if this were to pass, most voters don't understand how housing programs operate in our city. Oh, didn't we just create some new entity that is going to be essentially provide all of the answers that we need for affordable housing, and get confused and possibly get in the way of the vote?
So yes, I think this August we will all get a chance to vote on renewing the housing levy. It will hopefully be much larger than it was 7 years ago when it was first passed. However, the way the housing levy is used today, it is paired with federal low-income housing tax credits that require the nonprofits that receive the housing levy money and the federal tax credits to only serve people earning below a certain level of income. However, the way the federal government says you need help or assistance is area median income. What is your income relative to everyone else? When it should be, what is your income relative to your actual costs? The problem is our affordability crisis has grown far beyond just saying my income is below 50% of the area median income. So please, I can't say this on behalf of the campaign, but please vote yes on the housing levy this August. This is a different financial model which scales in a different way and needs to be added to the mix.
Question number 4, Mr. Chanmugam, you're first. Is establishment of a new PDA the best way to achieve the goals and to manage this proposed program?
Sure. I first want to start with a reminder that we are 7 years, 2 months, and 28 days into the city's declaration of a state of emergency on homelessness. What we have been doing for the last 7 years does not work, does not scale. The current financial models don't scale. We absolutely need to add new models that have been proven around the world to be very effective and very efficient, including in Montgomery County, Maryland, and Hawaii just passed a social housing measure as well. It is absolutely critical that we explore new models that can scale to the scope that, say, Singapore has, where 80% of people live in social housing, Copenhagen, where it's 20%, and Vienna, where it's 60%.
Initiative 135 does not address the homelessness crisis. It just doesn't. It's primarily a mixed income housing development proposal. It doesn't address homelessness. And only about a third of the housing that would be created would be for households at 50% of median and below. The deeper I have dug into this, folks, the more I'm flummoxed by it. I do not understand why real change is putting all this effort into something that basically is oriented toward a higher income level than where the need is, and does not at all deal with the problem of homelessness. It just doesn't.
Reverend Bloom, your first, what is your understanding of the term social housing?
It's a progressive model. It works well. It's been working for decades, maybe longer than decades. In a lot of the places that Suresh has mentioned. But it's rooted in a commitment by those countries to providing housing that's affordable for its residents. We don't have a commitment like that in the United States. There's no base. There's no a priori assumption in the United States and in the federal government that our government has a responsibility for housing the people. The housing levy is a result of the work of advocates back in the 1980s. I was one of them that put the first housing levy on the ballot. If you have a social democracy, as we do in Europe, including Austria, there is a commitment to taking care of people. We don't have that. And that's one of the reasons why I think this thing is really not going to work.
I definitely hear your frustrations. So I'd like to point out that Seattle was the first major city to embrace some of those commitments to a social democracy. We raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour. A lot of people were really concerned about what would happen to small businesses and large businesses, and we proved that it works. And then it spread all across the country. Seattle was the first place, and then it spread all across the country. We can make changes here. We can say, as the Seattle City Charter says, that the primary purpose of our city's government is to serve the general welfare of the people. We can say here in Seattle that serving a broad range of people who are not just the highly compensated software engineers is the right thing to do, that we can do it efficiently. And when we do it, no doubt it will spread around the country. In fact, we gained many of these ideas from Hawaii's legislation, which passed earlier this year, late last year, and a bill in California, which came very close to passing, and which has been running in Montgomery County for quite some time.
Question number 6, Mr. Chanmugam, you'll start. If established, what would happen if this social housing PDA goes bankrupt?
I'm prepared for this one. Let me pull up the legislation, which you can get from the houseourneighbors.org website. You can get the actual text. Oops, that's not it. There's a clause in the initiative that says no government entity, not the city, not the county, not the state, are responsible for the debts or the credit issued by the Public Development Authority. So it will primarily raise funds by issuing bonds guaranteed against future rents. So the poor souls on Wall Street, if this PDA is not managed well, might lose some money, but a well-managed PDA will maintain a strong credit rating. And this model, since it's well proven in other parts of the world, hopefully will reward both the buyers of those bonds and the residents of the buildings.
The state of Washington does not have an infinite supply of bonds available for housing. The nonprofits and other developers are down at Olympia in line asking for bond funding. The state has a finite amount of value in tax-exempt bonds. The demand of other PDAs and others seeking bond funding is exceeding the supply. Social housing will have to compete with the others, many of which are already serving low-income, homeless, and special needs housing. Whatever housing might be produced under this plan is at least 2 years away, maybe longer. And there's a serious question in my mind whether they ever get bond funding to do it. The thing's a little shaky, folks.
Question number 7, Reverend Boom, you're first. If voters turn down this initiative, are there other ways to provide housing for people with incomes between 80% and 120% of median area income?
I don't like the question. I'm going to tell you, folks, I live on a pension and Social Security. My income is $42,000 a year, and I am living in an apartment that I can afford in Seattle. I am below 80% of median. I'm probably at 60% of median. Yes, that's a challenge. But I get back to the concern that I raised at the beginning. When we had 10, 12, 14,000 people homeless on our streets every night in Seattle, I am concerned about those people primarily. I am less concerned about people who are struggling in the market. Yes, it's a problem. But also one of the ways that we can help to reduce this crisis is to support the levy at the end of the year. All of this is going to make a difference. I mean, that's something that real changes Suresh and I, and thank you very much, Adele.
So yes, I certainly hope that voters say yes to this. If it does not pass, this is not the only part of a set of solutions to our housing crisis. I'm going to poke a bee's hornet's nest here. The root cause of our housing affordability crisis is our exclusionary land use laws, which have a racist, deeply racist origin that started 100 years ago. And we will have an opportunity next year to reform our exclusionary land use laws. That alone won't solve our problems, but I do want to recommend every single person here, if you read one nonfiction book, read Homelessness is a Housing Problem. You may think that homelessness is caused by addiction or poverty. University of Washington professor Greg Colburn has done an extraordinarily detailed and data-driven analysis. The primary cause of homelessness is a lack of housing. We need to increase the supply of housing. That alone won't help because lots more software engineers will move here from other places that have exclusionary housing zoning laws.
Suresh and I are in agreement on that one. It's a housing problem.
A little comedy.
Hey, we need it.
Mr. Chanmugam, you're first. If approved, what do you estimate would be the overhead, that is, the cost of administering this program?
Sure, there's a great video that the campaign has put together, modeled on an existing affordable housing building on Capitol Hill that I recommend everyone watch. Just, I think, search I-135 on YouTube to see it. And it shows how a building could be funded through bonds, supporting a range of households in it, and generating a small surplus to ensure that the building is maintained over time. And once the bonds are paid off after 15, 30 years, it shows how those rents will then create a virtuous cycle where the Public Development Authority could build more housing and continue to expand. And when we invest on it in the time scales that we do for, say, our light rail system, we can do what other countries have done and house just a wide range of our community very affordably.
Sam, would you repeat the question?
Yes. If approved, what do you estimate would be the overhead, that is to say, the cost of administering this program?
The program in Maryland that has been cited as an example has continued to rely on public funding for its operations. In other words, it is not able to self-generate at the rate that the proponents of Initiative 135 claim is going to happen. Also, on the one hand, the initiative claims they're not going to go to the city for money, we're not going to compete with the nonprofits for housing levy money. The charter, section 12, says the city council will decide the amount of subsequent city support for the public developer, that's the program being created, which may include funds from any source available to do so, including, without limitation, the general fund, grant funds, and by issuing councilmanic revenue bonds. That, folks, is an open door to city subsidy should the public developer not be able to carry its own weight.
Question 9 for you, Reverend Bloom, to start. According to Seattle City Charter, only 3 of the 13 people appointed to the PDA board would be required to have expertise in the areas of finance, planning, and nonprofit development. What assurance would voters have that the people named to the PDA board are well qualified to develop and manage this program?
One word answer: zero. That's one of the concerns I have. Having served on the Pike Market PDA back in the 80s, I understand the complexity of managing a public development authority. And as I've read the whole charter, it's very ambitious, touches all the bases that all we liberals like, very inclusive, etc., etc. But the sophistication, the professionalism in terms of finance and housing development, etc., is going to be critical. And I am fearful that if this thing were to get off the ground, that the management of it. Now, I was former president of the board of Real Change, and I understand what the internal struggles are there, and they're talking about managing a PDA, which is a level of complexity, you know, at least 2 or 3 or 4 times higher.
So this is a key difference between the Seattle Social Housing Developer Public Development Authority and the 2 other public development authorities in Seattle, or 3 others that build affordable housing. 7 out of 13 seats on this board are actual residents of the housing, which is a critical difference. Similar in sort of the direction that Horizon House has, where many residents lead programs within the community. And the reason why this is so important is when you look at the boards of the existing PDAs, they do great work, but roughly half the board is composed of executives from the very same large corporations that spend about $2 million each Seattle City election working to elect people who will maintain what is currently the most regressive tax system in the country. We have a tax system that is brutally racist and horrifyingly unethical, that charges the highest rates in city, county, and state taxes to the lowest income residents. If we had a resident board that would,
Our final question.
Oh, yay.
Should we take additional questions from the floor? I saw one thumbs down.
You're making me work tonight, Sam. Come on.
Mr. Chanmugam, you'll be first. The Seattle Housing Authority, over the years, has rebuilt its housing at High Point, New Holly, Rainier Vista, and Yester Terrace with federal funds that called for the creation of mixed-income communities. Are you familiar with these efforts, and is SHA's experience at all relevant to this proposal?
Yes, I'm familiar. In 1 minute, I will just start with, I think, probably one of the most grievous mistakes that the Seattle Housing Authority has made. Yester Terrace, first mixed race affordable housing community in the country, which has been in public ownership for nearly a century. The Seattle Housing Authority sold off large plots of land to private developers in exchange for a short-term infusion of capital to build some new housing. And many of the buildings that these private developers now operate, which do have some units that are affordable, are not permanently affordable, some only for another 8 years. And many of those units, if the resident's income goes up, they may lose their subsidy immediately and revert back to market rate rents. Yester Terrace is a great example of why we brought forward this initiative. Land is the most expensive part of building affordable housing, and for us to take such a valuable asset and sell it off to private developers is the wrong thing. That's why I-135 requires the PDA to permanently hold ownership of its buildings and property.
Suresh and I are in agreement on that. All four of those garden communities fell victim to Hope 6, which was a program intended to revitalize, rehabilitate public housing nationally. And the examples that were used were like Pruitt-Eagle and so on in St. Louis and Chicago and these disasters. But these garden communities were an enormous success. And the Displacement Coalition fought against what happened down at Rainier Vista and at Holly Park. And probably well over 1,000 residents were displaced and never were able to find affordable or subsidized housing afterwards. So yes, I mean, we're definitely in agreement on this. But man, I'm going to run out of time here. There's one point. One of the concerns I have is that, okay, Section 13 of the charter, despite denying that they're going to are saying they're not going to use, they don't want to use city land, yet they want to be first in line for surplus land that the city makes available for affordable housing. That's a little mushy.
Very good. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Now it's time for your 2-minute closing statements. Reverend Boone, you are first.
Oh boy, I'm going to let a couple other people speak on my behalf here. Tim Harris, who is the founding director, a longtime director of Real Change, is opposed to this. He said, the prioritization of an inexperienced mixed-income development PDA over experienced developers focused on low-income housing simply slows the work of building housing for those who need it the most. That's the truth. Wrong priorities, wrong place, wrong time. Jean Cole Wells, whom I think you all know, or most of you know, simple sentence. I found your Seattle Times statement very compelling and voted accordingly. Big concern, as I said earlier, is that this issue just detracts the focus of the voters from understanding the new housing levy later this year. $840 million for possibly as many as 2,600 units, combined with the Jumpstart payroll tax, which would provide another 2,200 units, a total over 7 years of maybe almost 3,800 units. There's competition out there. Governor Inslee has already floated a proposal for bonds to beyond the state's debt limit of $4 billion to build housing in the future. The big issue locally is that the Regional Housing Authority has now come out with a report that would take $8 billion in capital costs and up to $3.5 billion in operating costs and tens of thousands of dollars to get us back on track to provide housing for everyone who needs it. This effort competes with that and does not help it.
Something I hadn't mentioned, can I start? Is that addressing homelessness, the state has delegated sole authority to the Seattle City Council and its legislation, which in turn has delegated to the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. So this Public Development Authority does not work directly on homelessness. What it does do is it prevents households from falling into homelessness. And also, it ensures that the folks who are building shelters and housing for people who are homeless and the people who are providing critical skilled services for people who are homeless have a place to live. If you have a master's in social work, you can't probably live in Seattle and serve the folks who are homeless here. I'll just close with just going through all the amazing organizations that have endorsed I-135, many of whom work to end homelessness. The Low Income Housing Institute, which builds most of the tiny shelters. You see tiny homes you see around town. Solid Ground, which provides services to people who are homeless. Real Change, which has been working for decades to serve people who are homeless. State Representative Nicole Macri, who also works as Deputy Director of the Downtown Emergency Services Center. The King County Democrats, King County NAACP, the MLK Labor Council, which is the largest council of unions in the area. State Representative Frank Chop, who's working to bring funding from the state legislature to this social housing developer. 3 school board members and the teachers union. When's the last time you saw management and workers come together and agree that we need to solve this problem? Probably most importantly, my mom. At age 80, my mom sold the house I grew up in Baton Rouge, moved here to Seattle to a 2-bedroom apartment. She believes this is the right thing to do, and if any of you have played bridge against Suresh Chanmugam at the Women's University Club, that's my mom. Ask her about I-135 and why she's voting yes.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. We're very pleased that you were able to come tonight to deal with this issue, and now I'll turn it back to Chairman Laura Weese.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Reverend Bloom, Suresh. I think we all came away with much more information about how to vote on this. It's really incredibly good. I want to say thank you to the people that have made this evening possible, in addition to our speakers. Weese, Branson, our Director of Events and Programs, without which we could not have done it. Carrie Krinsky, our professional resident who does such wonderful video camera work. To our timers, very efficient, whether we like that or not, Adele Reynolds and Doris Ray.
Brutally efficient.
Brutally efficient. Okay, we'll quote you next time. And I also wanted to say thank you to the members of the Election Forums Committee that did a lot of different jobs that we needed to have done tonight. And let me just say that Doris chaired the Questions Committee that took all the questions that came in and tried to come up with some good ones. Adele and John Clement and Ann Brown helped greet the speakers and special guests. Roger and Jean Lead, Sue Vadman helped with publicity. And let me see, Alec Piskin gets credit for bringing the water for the speakers. He's a new member of the committee. Anyway, big thank you to all of you in the audience, and you know it's up to you now. You're the ones with the power to decide, and I'm sure you'll get your ballots in the mail soon. Thank you all for coming. Good night.